Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you with another review. Today I'm reviewing a film I watched on Netflix last night. It was a film that I've been meaning to watch for a couple weeks. It came highly recommended by my friend LJ. And it is a film that I really did enjoy, and it's a film that if you have Netflix before the first, hopefully this review will be up before then, if not, sorry. But it's a film I highly implore you to look up. It is the 1957 film starring, among others, Henry Fonda, 12 Angry Men. Now, excuse me, my phone slid. It has a 8.9 on IMDb, a 97 with the audience on Rotten Tomatoes, and 100% with the critics. Think about that. How often does it get 100% on Rotten Tomatoes? Not that often. That should tell you something about this film. Here's the consensus. Sidney Lumet's feature debut is a superbly written, dramatically effective courtroom thriller that rightfully stands as a modern classic. I will agree with that. Because this film, it is a very good example of how a group of people can come to a consensus, especially if only one person disagrees with the rest of the group. And also is a good insight into how jury deliberations probably go at times, and also why, even if it does appear to be an open and shut case, while all the evidence should be looked at carefully before a decision is rendered, especially if it turns out later that the person who you're trying is innocent. I mean, they even see a few reasons from some of the characters why they want to get out there earlier. One of them wants to go to a ball game, but it also shows a good reason. Another good reason for looking at the evidence more carefully is our own biases, because one of the jurors, juror number 3, who was played in the film by Lee J. Cobb. He is a very biased character towards the defendant. You can tell that from the word go. And he's the last person in the end who changes his verdict, because I know this is a spoiler, but in the end they find the guy not guilty. I'm not going to spoil why, but just from the word go you could tell he's the most biased one. And of course Henry Fonda plays a character that is the only one that does not vote guilty in the beginning, and all the actors do a very good job. I mean, besides Fonda and Cobb, we got Martin Balsam, John Fiedler, E.G. Marshall, Jack Klugman, Edward Bynes, Jack Warden, Joseph Sweeney, Ed Begley, I'm guessing, George Voskovec, I'm going to have trouble with this last name, Voskovec, and Robert Webber. And they all do good jobs for their role, and each character is specifically different. Now, some of them have more characteristics than others, like Fonda's, Cobb's. We're going to see the Sweeney's character, the preacher guy. Begley's character is also kind of a bigot, but doesn't seem to come across as big as Cobb's character. And Marshall's one is also good because he's a self-assured stockbroker who's only concerned with the facts, which makes him, being one of the last people to change his vote to not guilty, the most interesting, especially with what it is. Now, what really makes this drama tick, obviously, is two things: the story and the camaraderie between the actors. Now, the film is about 96 minutes, but it really shows like it's supposed to be like going over the course of a day, so you could probably guess that there is a couple moments where there's a little bit of a time jump, because I doubt that the whole thing happens in real time, but the way the movie is presented, it makes it seem like it is, but then you could tell with how they talk about what's going on outside the room, like with the weather, that it's not. Now, you could tell from the beginning it's probably going to be an open and shut case. I mean, all the witnesses pointing out that they think the guy does it. But then, of course, we got the voice of reason, who is Fonda's character. He points out some of the flaws in the evidence. Like, the biggest one is that the defense attorney didn't do a good job, but then again, he gives a reason why. The guy was court-appointed and probably didn't want to be assigned the case, which is kind of sad and makes you really think about people who have court-appointed attorneys nowadays, that if their lawyer doesn't do a good job, it could be maybe they didn't want the case. So it kind of makes you think about that, and also makes you want to tell your court-appointed attorney, if you ever have to use one, you better do the best job you can do, because even if you don't want to be here, it's my life at stake. You do it. You go out there and you show them what for. And I do like that Fonda's character does mention that the burden of proof lies with the prosecution, but with how their case is presenting at the beginning of the film, you think that they've probably proven it. But then they go through each piece of evidence. Like both witnesses, he points out the ways that they could have been, their evidence and testimony could have been flawed. And of course it makes you wonder, did the prosecution in this movie know that the evidence was flawed and just presented it in a way to where it doesn't look as flawed as it actually was? And of course, the defense attorney not doing the best job didn't notice these. Like if it was a lawyer from a better movie, like if it was like Perry Mason or Atticus Fitch, or even Robert Downey Jr.'s character from The Judge, you know that those lawyers would have picked this thing apart and found it, and then more than likely the 12 Angry Men wouldn't be arguing as heavily as they do during the course of the film. But you know, woulda, coulda, shoulda. I'm not going to spoil every little bit of evidence, but it is interesting how it is presented as the film goes along. Now, one thing I must say is that they never really give an indication of what ethnicity the defendant is, but there's very, very subtle hints within the dialogue that the guy is not Caucasian like the rest of them, and this is mostly from the two bigot biased characters. Like, you know, one of them said they always are like that. Kind of gives an indication that he is probably black. This is my guess because of the time period, but then again, since it's not specific, you could probably put in any non-Caucasian ethnicity. It could be Asian, it could be Hispanic, it could be Native American. But more than likely, given the time period, most likely he's black. Which of course adds a little bit more of a context to some of that dialogue. And they're like, oh, just because he lives in the ghetto and he's a black young man, he automatically was guilty of it. Just makes you think about it a little bit more. It also makes you wonder if that's the reason why the prosecution decided to present the case in the manner that they did, along with the witnesses trying to say they're 100% sure, especially the woman, because her evidence being distorted is probably the more damning of the two, because the other one is like, okay, you can see why they probably did that, even though he probably should have made it clear through questioning that he wouldn't have been able to hear it, when combined with the lady's one. But the other little bits of evidence that they point out what reasons for it, it's interesting, but how they present that the two eyewitnesses were wrong, those are probably the most damning against the prosecution's case. I'm not going to spoil it, obviously, but it's pretty good, and especially how they're presented. And it's kind of interesting how juror number 3 eventually comes around and changes his verdict. It's kind of an emotional moment. I'm not going to spoil it, but it is emotional. And of course, Fonda's character, you could tell at the beginning he does have a little bit of reasonable doubt, but as he goes along and presents why he thinks that there is a possibility that the guy didn't do it, you could tell he's getting more and more confident. More so as more people jump to his side. Now, of course, the first little bit involves a knife, which is a good little moment, and you could tell the other jurors are kind of angry about it, but I think that's a nice little jumping off point, and then it goes more and more to stuff that you're like, okay, that's probably why. And of course, like I've said, it makes you wonder about the jury process today, you know, like with cases like Casey Anthony, among others. It's like, what kind of stuff like this went on in that jury room? It's just one thing you wonder. I mean, in the jury room, was there one person who was on either side who eventually did it like this? Oh, I'd say probably with the case in the movie, there's more thing for reasonable doubt than in the Casey Anthony case, but, you know, that's getting into a whole other discussion. Now, of course, seeing the discussion like this is probably the most interesting in the in that whole Trayvon Martin situation case, but that's, you know, that's a whole other discussion for another day too. You know, just, you know, makes you think like that. Also makes you think if you were on trial like this that you would want at least one juror who actually has the common sense to want to look through all the bits of evidence and not just, you know, vote with their gut and actually look at all the evidence and dissect it. Especially if your own lawyer did a shoddy job. Now, of course, the movie is directed by Sidney Lumet, if I'm pronouncing that right, and I'm not familiar with a lot of this director's films. I've heard of some of them, like Dog Day Afternoon and The Wiz, and of course, Before the Devil Knows You're Dead. A couple of these other ones I might have heard of. It's just, you know, they're not ringing a bell, but it has a long career. There's a lot of films on this list. And of course, a lot of the actors people know, especially Henry Fonda, which apparently he also produced this film, which I guess that was kind of a bad time for him, because he apparently afterwards he's like, never again. The film was remade in 1997, which I do want to look up the remake mostly for two reasons, because it has George C. Scott and James Woods in it. The only thing I know is that George C. Scott plays the Cobb character in that, which is kind of funny because it's the second time he's taken over a role from Cobb. The other time, of course, being taken over his role in Exorcist 3. Now, of course, you know it's the usual time to look at the trivia. The movie is commonly used in business schools and workshops to illustrate team dynamics and conflict resolution techniques. At the beginning of the film, the cameras are all positioned above eye level and mounted with wide-angle lenses to give the appearance of a greater distance between the subjects. As the film progresses, the cameras slip down to eye level. By the end of the film, nearly all of it is shot below eye level in close-up with telephoto lenses to increase the encroaching sense of claustrophobia. That's one thing I kind of noticed, but I guess it was just like a very subtle thing. And then reading, I'm like, that's why. It's a nice, effective technique. Subtle, too. Okay, I've already talked about that. The director had the actors all stay in the same room for hours on end and do their lines over and over again without taping them. This would give them a real taste of what it would be like to be cooped up in a room with the same people. You kind of see that in their performances that they did that, and that's good that they practiced that. And apparently now all 12 Angry Men are no longer alive. Shot in a total of 365 separate takes. You can see that they did a lot of takes with this film with all the different camera angles. The film was nominated for 3 Oscars and lost out in each of its categories to The Bridge on the River Kwai, another film classic. As shooting of the film went on, the director gradually changed to lenses of longer focal lengths so that the background seemed to close in on the characters. That's another little thing. The film failed to make a profit, so Henry Fonda never received his deferred salary. Let me just see what it says. The estimated budget was $350,000, which for '57 probably was at least a decent size, but not a huge one, especially compared to other movies around the same time. So that's kind of sad, but at least it's one of those films that, despite not making money when it first came out, it is looked at as a classic. Because the painstaking rehearsals for the film lasted an exhausting 2 weeks, filming had to be completed in an unprecedented 21 days. Considering that, it's amazing that the film turned out as well as it did. Henry Fonda immediately complained to the director about the cheap backgrounds outside the jury room windows when he walked on set. They looked like shit. Hitch had great backdrops. You could walk right into them, Fonda said, referring to his previous film, which he had done with Alfred Hitchcock, The Wrong Man. Lumet assured him that the director of photography, Boris Kaufman, had a plan to make them work. Which I didn't even notice how bad the backdrops look. I guess it shows. A great cinematographer can cover up something as crappy as a bad backdrop. Henry Fonda, who symbolically wears white throughout the film, personally asked the director to direct the film adaptation, having been impressed with his work on the TV show Studio One in Hollywood and the Alcoa Hour. Fonda was asked by United Artists to make the film, so he did it as both actor and producer. Okay, I already mentioned the rest of that. The unusual looking knife in this movie is an Italian stiletto switchblade with the Filipino-style crisp blade. When John Calley was running United Artists Pictures between '93 and '96, he gave an interview to The New Yorker where he discussed United Artists continuing rights to the project and said he would be looking into a possible remake that would have starred Michelle Pfeiffer and been set around the 1992 Los Angeles riots and the aftermath of the Rodney King trial verdicts. Would have been interesting, but probably would have been a little bit too topical. There are no female characters whatsoever in the film aside from extras seen in the courtroom prologue. Looking for something interesting. Along the movie, number 3 appears several times. The 3 first minutes of the movie, the only ones outside the jury room. The courtroom where the trial happens is 2:28. 2 plus 2 plus 8 equals 12. 1 plus 2 equals 3. Juror number 8 affirms to have 3 children. At a point, juror number 7 orders shut up to other jurors under the context that as jurors they have a salary of $3 per day. At another point, juror number 6 comments that he was 3 days painting a house. Juror number 4 explains that between the crime happened 3 months before the trial. And finally, juror number 3 is who confronts juror number 8 against the innocence of the accused along the movie. Sorry about the bad grammar at times. That's how it was written. That's about it. About it to talk about the film. Like I said, it's a classic. I don't really have any problems with the film. I'd have to say I give it a 5 out of 5, and it does come with my highest of high recommendations, especially if you are a fan of Fonda's work and, courtroom dramas.